Happy Sabbath. We're happy to have you with us and everybody here locally. Wonderful to have everybody with us here again today. I'd like to continue today in the book of Leviticus, where we've been going through, marching through. Started Genesis, did Exodus, now we're in Leviticus. And last time we finished chapter 17. We'll pick it up from there. I like to just kind of once every 3 or 4 weeks come back and do another chapter or two and keep marching through Torah. So today we'll pick it up then in Leviticus chapter 18 in verse 1. It says, "The Eternal spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, I am the Eternal your God. According to the doings of the land of Egypt, where you dwelt, you shall not do." God wants his people to be different. "According to the doings of the land of Canaan, where I'm bringing you, you shall not do." God puts us in the world, but he expects us to be different. He wants us to learn how to live in the world, obviously, because that's where he put us, but he wants us to exercise a certain amount of character, a certain amount of restraint, a certain amount of willpower. He wants us to struggle against sin. I mean, that was the very first lesson that we have of Cain and Abel, when God told Cain that sin, lies at the door, and its desire was for him, but that he should learn to rule over it. And so it's just like with exercise, unless there's some resistance, the muscle is not made stronger. And so God says, you are going to live in the land, but don't do the things they do. Not according to the doings of the land where I'm bringing you, you shall not do, nor shall you walk in their ordinances. You shall observe my judgments and keep my ordinances, God says, and walk in them. I am the Eternal your God. You shall therefore keep my statutes and my judgments, which if a man does, he shall live by them. I am the Eternal. None of you, then, so now he gives the instruction that we need to keep his statutes. We have in the New Testament, of course, Yeshua in Matthew 5, he said, Don't even think that I came to destroy the law, Torah, or the prophets. I didn't come to destroy them, but to fulfill them. And then some people say, yeah, exactly, he fulfilled them for us. Well, let's just don't interrupt his, statement halfway through. Listen to the whole paragraph of what he said. He said, then he continues and said, therefore, whoever does and teaches even the least of these commandments will be called least in the kingdom. But whoever does and teaches others to keep even the least of the commandments will be called greatest in the kingdom. So Messiah expects us to teach and live these laws. So none of you, he begins to give them the instruction then in chapter 18, Leviticus 18 and verse 6. None of you shall approach anyone who is near of kin to him to uncover his nakedness. I am the Eternal. So now he's going to break it down. So nobody who is near of kin, now he's breaking it down. The nakedness of your father or the nakedness of your mother you shall not uncover. She is your mother, you shall not uncover her nakedness. This is why when they found Noah naked, they put a blanket up and they walked backwards toward him. They didn't want to, of course it's referring to, sexual activity, but it doesn't limit it to that. You should not uncover their nakedness. So she is the nakedness of your father, verse 7, or the nakedness of your mother you shall not uncover. She is your mother. You shall not uncover her nakedness. Verse 8, the nakedness of your father's wife you shall not uncover. It is your father's nakedness. And so here it's instructing that you should not take, sometimes maybe a husband and a wife and somebody dies, today's world, of course, there's divorces, and somebody's now remarried. And so the children, you can have children who's maybe that's my father, but that's not my mother, or that you're my mother, but that's not my father, because there's a new, a new marriage, and so the children, it might be the child of the mother, but not the child of the father, etc. So the nakedness of your father's wife, it may not be your mother, but it's your father's wife. You might say, well, not related to me. Well, it's as if it was your father. Even though it's your father's wife, it's as if it were your father. Since it's your father's nakedness. It's his privacy. You should not uncover it. You shall not uncover it. It's your father's nakedness. Now, this was a statute, a very basic statute of God. And of course, many people say, well, the statutes were not taught in the New Testament. The Apostle Paul, taught how the law was done away with and these kinds of things. And then they refer to the conference in Acts, where it says, don't just require the Gentiles that they not put all these burdens on them. The reference was to circumcision and to sacrifices, but people interpret that the way it best fits their belief. And so, they say, you don't have to keep, the Gentiles did not have to keep the law, except for that they were not supposed to commit adultery, and they were not supposed to eat blood, and they kind of limit it to that. So, of course, here it is, the nakedness of your father's wife, you shall not uncover it. It's your father's nakedness. That is a statute of God. And if we go to 1 Corinthians chapter 5, we find the Apostle Paul dealing with this very thing. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, in the very liberal, very perverse church of Corinth. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, in verse 1, he says, it is actually reported that there is sexual immorality among you, and such sexual immorality is not even named among the Gentiles, or spoken of, in other words. Some translations admit the word named, and just it's not even among the Gentiles that a man has his father's wife. And so here's a man who had his father's wife, who would be like his stepmother, I guess, and he says, and you are puffed up. They were so confident in their righteousness, and so confident in their freedom from sin. We can do whatever we want. They were puffed up. They were confident. They were, proud. And it kind of reminds me, recently a man came out who, I don't know, it doesn't matter who he was, just an executive at a very, very large corporation, and somebody revealed the fact that he was gay, and then he said yes, and and I'm very proud of what God is. He tried to bring it in, and I'm very thankful to God, I think is the way he put it. Very thankful to God for who I am and what I am as a gay man, and he tried to make it as if God were sanctioning this, and he was grateful to God for it. But here's what the Bible is actually saying. And that is another matter altogether. Sometimes people are very, I'm gay and I'm proud of it, you might hear. Or I'm this and I'm that and I'm proud of it. So this is kind of what Paul's talking about here, that they had these things going on in their congregation and they were kind of proud of it. They were above it. They were able to handle it. It's like, does it bother you? Well, you have your problems, We are above that kind of thing. This is the new modern way. And but he says, you should have been mourning that he who has done this deed might be taken away from among you. For I indeed, as absent in the body, but present in spirit, have already judged as though I were present concerning him who has done this deed. In the name of our Lord Yeshua Messiah, when you are gathered together along with my spirit, with the power of our Lord Yeshua Messiah, deliver such a one to Satan for the destruction of the flesh. This is what Satan does when he wants to destroy you. He leads people into these kinds of things. I could take you on a journey through the scriptures and show you these things in a number of places. But here, this exact statute, the Apostle Paul was dealing with this. And he says it's not even named among the Gentiles. And it's kind of interesting that he said that to a Gentile church. The church was made up of Gentiles. It was not a Jewish church. It was a church of Corinth. But they were supposed to have repented and been grafted into the body of Messiah. And they were supposed to be grafted into the tree that is Israel, it says. That you would become an Israelite in that sense, that you would be grafted in, at least to the tree that is Israel. That you would not live that way of life. So he goes on to talk about, don't you know your glorying is not good? A little leaven leavens the whole lump. So these kinds of things will spread. And that's just the way it is. And you can say, well, you know what, you're just not up with the times. It's the modern, that's the age today. Yes, that's true, but these things do spread. He says, don't you know a little leaven leavens the whole lump? So you put in a little bit of leaven, and it's not like, boom, it just swells up instantly. It's not like, but it takes a little bit of time, but then it begins to expand, and leaven put a pinch here, and before long, the whole lump is infected or inflated. It will spread. And so I just think even over my short lifetime, when I think about the way the world was in society when I was a child, and how things have spread, how things have increased. And so what the Apostle Paul was talking about as he taught them how to keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread is how sin, when it's tolerated, will spread. It will increase. It doesn't just stay the same. It will continue to increase. And so, that's what Paul was having to deal with, this exact sin that we find here in Leviticus chapter 18 and in verse 8. So back in Leviticus 18, now picking it up, continuing in verse 9, it says, the nakedness of your sister, the daughter of your father, or the daughter of your mother, whether born at home or elsewhere, their nakedness you shall not uncover. The nakedness of your son's daughter, or your daughter's daughter, their nakedness you shall not uncover, for theirs is your own nakedness. The nakedness of your father's wife's daughter, begotten by your father, she is your sister. You shall not uncover her nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's sister. She is near of kin to you. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister. She is near of kin to you. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's brother. You shall not approach his wife. So you might think, well, he's my father's brother, but my father's brother's wife is not related to me in any way. Well, so that exact thing, you shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's brother. You shall not approach his wife. She is your aunt, an aunt-in-law. But again, remember we read earlier, it's as if you uncovered the nakedness of your father's brother himself. So that sin was also dealt with in the New Testament as well. And so let's go and we'll see that sin being dealt with. In Mark chapter 8, a man lost his head over this particular sin. Mark chapter 8. And I suppose the days are coming again when people will have a great price that they will pay for standing up for certain morals and standards that are of God. In Mark chapter 6, Mark 6, okay, I'll just pick it up. In verse 17, it says, Herod himself, Mark 6 and verse 17, Herod himself has sent and laid hold of John and bound him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, for he had married her. So here is Herod who married his brother's wife. That exact statute that we just referred to. For John had said to Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. Verse 18. Therefore Herodias held it against him and wanted to kill him, but she couldn't, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a just and a holy man, and he protected him. And when he heard him, he did many things and heard him gladly. Then an opportune day came when Herod on his birthday gave a feast for his nobles, the high officers and the chief men of Galilee. And Herodias, when Herodias' daughter herself came in and danced and pleased Herod and those who sat with him, the king said to the girl, ask me whatever you want and I will give it to you. And so she said, I want John the head of John the Baptist, verse 24. And she got it because he taught the statutes, he paid with his life. So, it's kind of interesting that, John came in the spirit and the power of Elijah, or with the spirit and power of Elijah. Of course, Elijah was fled for his life from the wicked queen. But in the case here, he paid with his life for teaching the Torah of God. He absolutely did. So he was beheaded over it. So back in Leviticus 18 and verse 14, again we see the statutes being taught, being adhered to, being followed in the New Testament, in the Brit Hadashah. We see that repeatedly. And people that think the statutes are not in the New Testament they must just be blind, spiritually blind indeed. It's a very sad thing. So continuing, Leviticus 18 then, and verse 15, he says, "You shall not uncover the nakedness of your daughter-in-law. She is your son's wife. You shall not uncover her nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your brother's wife. It is your brother's nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of a woman and her daughter. Nor shall you take her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter to uncover her nakedness. They are near of kin to you. So, nor shall you take a woman as a rival to her sister to uncover her nakedness while the other is alive." Now, we know what happened in the case of Jacob when he was deceived, and he thought he was getting Rachel, and he ended up getting the sister. And of course, they did have rivalry. They did. But also realize, too, that there is one additional thing that we need to understand here. Originally, God gave us these statutes, but there was Adam and Eve, and when they had children, there was nobody else. So these statutes were not given immediately because there were, brother and sister, that's it, That's all there was. Everybody was near of kin for the first few generations, and even into the days of Jacob, that was not that uncommon yet. Remember, Abraham married Sarah, his half-sister? That was before there was enough population in the world where God said, okay, enough of that. It's not healthy, it's not good. And so he gave us these statutes, but in the beginning, it was simply not possible. Otherwise, God would have had to have created obviously more than just Adam and Eve. He'd had to have created other couples as well. So, but he didn't do it that way. But anyway, just an explanation. But it wasn't long before God changed that. So you don't take a woman as a rival to her sister to uncover her nakedness while the other is alive. So if you're married to a woman and she dies, after she dies, if you want to marry her sister and there's no other reason why that would prohibit it, that would be acceptable. But you cannot marry the sister while the other sister is still alive. Same thing, to get a divorce and then marry a sister while the divorced first wife is still alive, that is wickedness. That is not allowed in God's law. Verse 19, "Also you shall not approach a woman to uncover her nakedness as long as she is in her customary impurity." So this is another one that people think, hey, it's just a statute of God, okay? We don't have to get into details. I think everybody understands what it is. It says what it says, and it means what it means. And people might think, well, I just don't see what's wrong with it. I'm not hurting anybody. People say that about all kinds of things. But God doesn't judge the way we think or based upon what we like or what we think. He's God, not us. We don't get to decide. God doesn't like it. He says it's a violation. He puts it right alongside marrying your brother's wife or what have you. Or your uncles, He puts it in the midst of all these other things. So he does not like it. In Ezekiel chapter 18, we'll come back here in a moment. I'll just go over to Ezekiel chapter 18 just briefly. Ezekiel 18. In verse 4, it talks about the soul who sins, it shall die. But if a man is just, if a man does what is lawful and right, he has not eaten on the mountain shrines, That's, a type of idolatry. Nor lifted his eyes to the idols of the house of Israel. He's not in idolatry. Nor has he defiled his neighbor's wife. That's good. He has not committed adultery. Nor approached a woman during her impurity. So these are the things that God lists as what somebody does if they are a just man. If they are living according to the law, they will live. God says these people, this is a list of the things that God says will cause people to live. That is such an important thing that God chose to put it in here several times in the Bible as one of the things that if you do this, you will live. And if you don't do it, you will die. That's how important it is to God. So you can say, or a man or a woman can look at God and say, I don't see how it hurts anybody. And God can say, I told you that there was a death penalty attached to it. So, then I guess it's who gets to decide. But God's view of things is not the same as the world's view of things. And God gets to be God. So, if he has not oppressed anyone, he puts it right along. People might think, well, you could approach a woman during her menstrual cycle, but as long as I'm not oppressing anybody, not doing anybody any harm, well, that's not how God sees it. He has restored the debtor to the debtor his pledge. He has robbed no one with violence. He's given his bread to the hungry and covered the naked with clothing. What if you did all those things except for that one? It puts you at odds, at cross purposes with God. Don't do it. If he has not exacted usury, verse 8, nor taken any increase, but has withdrawn his hand from lawlessness and executed true judgment between man and man. If he has walked in my statutes and he has kept my judgments, he is just, he shall surely live, says the eternal God. He shall live. If he begets a son who is a robber or a shedder of blood or does any of these things and does none of the duties, the things that you're required to do, they're good, but he has eaten on the mountains or the mountain shrines and defiled his neighbor's wife and oppressed the poor and the needy and robbed by violence and not restored the pledge and lifted his eyes to idols or committed abomination, which is what's referred to in verse 6, not approaching a woman during her impurity. He has exacted usury or has taken increase. Shall he then live? He shall not live. If he has done any of these abominations, he will surely die. His blood will be upon him. If, however, he begets a son who sees all the sins which his father had done and considers, but does not do likewise, he has not eaten on the mountain shrines, nor lifted his eyes to the idols of the house of Israel, nor has he defiled his neighbor's wife or oppressed anyone. Goes down with a list again. He's walked in my statutes. He will not die for the lawlessness of his father. He will live. As for his father, because he cruelly oppressed, robbed his brother, and did what was not good among his people, he will die for his iniquity. And yet you say, why should not the son bear the guilt of the father? Because the son has done what is lawful and right. He has kept my statutes and done them. He will live. The soul who sins will die. The son will not bear the guilt of the father, nor the father bear the guilt of the son. The righteousness of the righteous will be upon himself, and the wickedness of the wicked will be upon himself. God wants the wicked to turn from their wickedness so that they will live. He wants the righteous to maintain their righteousness and teach others. The way of the eternal is fair. God says he has no pleasure in the death of the wicked. So it's kind of one of those things where sometimes people think that's not a big deal. God says it's a big deal. Continuing, verse 20, moreover, you shall not lie carnally with your neighbor's wife to defile yourself with her. Leviticus 18:20. You shall not let any of your descendants pass through the fire to Molech, nor shall you profane the name of your God. I am Yahweh. Do not profane that beautiful name. You shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It is an abomination. Nor shall you mate with any beast. Now, God actually connects these. He says, nor. In other words, it's a continuation of the same statement. I know it's in a different verse because men came later and they divided it up and put different verses in there so you could try to catalog it and find your place quickly. But I'm just saying that God links these two together. You shall not lie with a male as with a woman, nor shall you mate with any beast. Those things are an abomination. Nor shall any woman stand before a beast to mate with it. It is perversion. You shall not defile yourselves with any of these things. So, today, for a man to lie with a man as with a woman, or vice versa, women with women, it's not considered an abomination. It's just considered free choice, and that's the world today. But understand, God makes a link here. If you think it's going to stop there where they say, what is marriage? God defines marriage. A man and a woman shall twine together, and the two shall become one flesh. When a man and a woman join themselves and become echad, they become one. That is marriage. So man comes along and says, well, a man can just marry a man, or a woman can marry a woman, but that's not the definition of marriage that God gave us. And you can think, well, you just want to be... let everybody be accepting, Let it be accepting of everybody. Well, you can't spend your life judging people. You're going to end up falling because of your own sins, even if they're just a sin of a different nature. Nor does that mean, however, that it's okay. And there is a difference between not judging somebody or not condemning somebody or not hating somebody, because all of those things are stupid. To hate somebody because of their sins? We're all sinners. Every one of us. That'd be stupid. But nor do we say, you know what, it's okay to lie. I don't mind if you lie to me. Just keep on lying. It doesn't mind if you steal. It doesn't mind if you're killing people. It's not okay. That doesn't mean you judge people about it, doesn't mean you hate, and nor is it in your right to try to take it into your own hands and have your own vengeance and become your own judge. God is the judge, and he will carry out the penalties. But it doesn't make it okay either. It just doesn't. And if you think that it's going to stop with men marrying men and women marrying women, then you are sadly mistaken. That what's the next step? It's bestiality. Who's going to be the first one? I think it's already happened, as a matter of fact. It says, you know what? I love my pet dog, and I want to marry it. You think that's not going to happen? People marrying their animals? When you get down Satan's path, there's no limit. These things aren't fun to talk about, but it's just one of the statutes of God. God links them together. One leads to the other. Perversion leads to more perversion. You always got to have more. You watch a movie, 50 years ago, and what titillated the senses 50 years ago, it looks corny today. So they got better, and they got more graphic, and they got better at their special effects. And then it's like, wow, that was exciting. Now I like this. That was really cool. And now it's 30 years ago now. It's like, it's still pretty corny today now. But yeah, hey, by 20 years ago, I don't know, when was it that they came out with the Matrix? They started getting really high tech. But that wasn't enough. And now they've passed that up. And they're more and more gory. And they're more and more detail oriented. And that's just the nature of things. There's got to be more sensation, right? Insatiable appetite. And so that's what happens with this kind of sin. These sins, they're insatiable, and they will only get worse. It's perversion. Verse 24, do not defile yourselves with any of these things, for by these things the nations, whole nations are defiled, which I am casting out before you. Now this is another one. I know it's like this isn't a fun subject. I'm just going through it because it's in Torah. I'm not going to dodge it. But this is another one of those things that was dealt with in the New Testament. The Apostle Paul had to deal with it specifically. We'll find that in Romans chapter 1. So I'll take us there just for a little bit here. Romans chapter 1. Because the statutes, again, are being taught by the Apostle Paul to the church at Rome here. Romans chapter 1 and verse 18. It says, "The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them." You know, we have the Bible if we will accept it. We also have what they call natural law or nature, if we will accept it. That's why Paul talks about the natural use of a thing as compared to the unnatural use. "For since the creation of the world, as invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even as eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were they thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and they changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like a corruptible man, birds, four-footed beasts, creeping things." In other words, various idols that you try to make and say, okay, worship that. "So God gave them up to uncleanness. Uncleanness in the lusts of their hearts, to dishonor their bodies among themselves." And that's what God calls it, dishonoring your own body. Those who have exchanged the truth of God for the lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator. Sometimes people are self-worshipers. It's whatever I want. I am the most important thing, and I will be my own God and serve myself and gratify myself with whatever I want. That is today's world. "For this reason," verse 26, "God gave them up to vile passions," vile things. "For even their women exchanged the natural use for what is against nature. Likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one for another, men with men, committing what is shameful, and receiving in themselves the penalty of their error, which was due." The Apostle Paul is teaching Leviticus 18 to the church of Rome. "And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind to do those things which are not fitting, being filled with all unrighteousness, the sexual immorality." Sexual immorality. And then he puts it right in there with covetousness, malice, envy, murder, evil-mindedness. And it goes on in verse 32. This is the warning for those who don't practice it but are accepting of others who do. There's a difference between accepting the world as what it is, and not, you can't fight the whole world, but to approve of it. That is a different thing. So he says, "Knowing the righteous judgment of God, that those who practice such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but approve of those who practice them." Don't give approval to such things. You can be tolerant, meaning that what are you going to do? You can't do anything. Okay, you can be tolerant. That means you shouldn't hate people. You shouldn't be trying to expose somebody else's sin. That principle still applies. You don't want to go out and try to out everybody's sin all the time. That's wrong. God doesn't like backbiters, whisperers, talebearers, just to try to go out and expose everybody all the time and embarrass them. God doesn't like that. But nor does he want us to be approving of these things. Those who approve of them have the same penalty as those who do them. If you don't understand that, please read again Romans 1 and verse 32. The end of the verse is very explicit, very clear. Those who approve of them. This is why Paul was so frustrated, again, with the church at Corinth. They were puffed up, and they weren't mourning. It didn't bother them. It should bother you. It should bother you into your very soul. You should be mourning when these things, they should bother you. You have to be accepting. You have to be forgiving. You have to be loving. You have to be filled with love. But don't confuse loving somebody with accepting their behavior. That is a huge leap. It's not the same. You can love somebody and you can forgive them, but that doesn't mean you should accept their behavior. And nor does it mean that you should approve of it. It doesn't mean you should fight against them. I'm not a teacher of political correctness. I'm a teacher of Torah. Leviticus chapter 18, verse 22, you shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It is an abomination. You shall not mate with any beast to defile yourself with it, nor shall any woman stand before a beast to mate with it. It's a perversion. Do not defile yourselves with any of these things, for by all these the nations are defiled, which I am casting out before you. The land is defiled, therefore I visit the punishment of its iniquity upon it, and the land vomits out its inhabitants. These things, homosexuality and bestiality, were the reasons why God dispossessed the nations that were in the area of Israel at the time, and then he gave it to the children of Israel because they had those sins. When Israel begins to practice these sins, he exiles them. The land vomits them out. And it says that when Messiah returns, things will be as it was in the days of Lot. Very perverse. As it was in the days of Noah, when the whole earth suffered destruction. And the tribulation, once again, it doesn't have to be against us. Don't let the world sway you to become accepting of its ways. You shall not learn their ordinances and do their statutes or do their ways. You shall observe my statutes. Don't do any of the doings of the land where I am sending you, God said. That's how he began the chapter. You shall keep my statutes and my judgments, verse 26, and not commit any of these abominations, either any of your own nation or any stranger, that would be the Gentiles. So these things are binding for the Gentiles, or any stranger who sojourns among you, like those who claim to be Christians, which means I'm grafted into the house of Israel. It's not acceptable. For all these abominations the men of the land have done, who were before you, and thus the land is defiled, lest the land vomit you out also, when you defile it, as it vomited out the nations that were before you. For whoever commits any of these abominations, the persons who commit them shall be cut off from among their people. Lose out, in other words, as being part of that the inheritance. Therefore you shall keep my ordinance, so that you do not commit any of these abominable customs which were committed before you, and that you do not defile yourselves by them. I am Yahweh, your Elohim. Leviticus 19 and verse 1. The Eternal spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the congregation of the children of Israel and say to them, you shall be holy, for the Eternal your God is holy. Every one of you shall revere his mother and his father, and keep my Sabbaths. I am the Eternal your God. So here's an interesting instruction. He's telling the children, not just children, but adults for that matter, but show respect for your mother and father. Keep my Sabbaths. So the rabbis have gone over in great detail studying this and what they say it means, and I agree with them. What they say it means is that if you have a mother and a father who's telling you, you don't need to keep the Sabbath, go ahead and, you can join your football team and play football practice every Sabbath, or whatever, and you don't have to keep the Sabbath. You respect your mother, you respect your father, but you honor my Sabbaths. God still holds you accountable, even if your parents are teaching you otherwise. You respect your mother and your father, but you obey God. That's And I agree with that. Of course, and if your parents are obeying God, then you respect them. It's all the more beautiful. But definitely, the children God is speaking to here, he wants them to keep his Sabbaths, whether the parents are or not. Verse 4, do not turn to idols, nor make for yourselves molten gods. I am the eternal your God. And if you offer a sacrifice of a peace offering to the eternal, you shall offer it of your own free will. God likes it when we make peace offerings to him of our own free will, something that comes from our heart out of a love, attitude of love, like a gift. It's a peace offering, and don't do it begrudgingly. God doesn't want anything like that begrudgingly. It shall be eaten on the same day you offer it, and on the next day you can, because what they would do is they would take an animal and dedicate it, and they would bring it, and the priest would take certain portions of it, and the rest of it they would eat. And maybe they'd have a big barbecue and invite people over. This is my peace offering to God, and make a big event out of it. And they could eat it, what was left, what the priest didn't take that day and the following day. But don't eat anything on the third day, or the whole sacrifice is voided and will not be accepted. It will have not made peace between you and God. It will be rejected. It shall be eaten the same day you offer it, verse 6, and on the next. And if any remains until the third day, it shall be burned in the fire. If it is eaten at all on the third day, then it's an abomination. It shall not be accepted. The whole sacrifice is ruined if you do that on the third day. I think there is principle that can be applied to that today. You can just think about various ways that how these kinds of things can apply. We make peace offerings to God yet even today, and there are just certain principles that just kind of just cogitate on it, how it might be applicable for you today, because there are many different ways. I could sit here and just kind of ponder and think about how it would apply to an offering you gave to somebody in a synagogue or a congregation somewhere, and maybe you share in the offering with them a little bit, and maybe you share again. I don't know, but limit it. The third day it was not to be eaten. Therefore, everyone who eats, verse 8, shall bear his iniquity, because he has profaned the hallowed offerings of the eternal, and that person will be cut off from his people. When you reap the harvest, verse 9, of your land, you shall not wholly reap the corners, in other words, completely reap the corners of your field, nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest. So, in other words, you don't go all the way out to every last tree, all the way, and make sure you get every apple, or every last pear, or every last peach, or every last fig, or oh man, there's still a peach up there. How did they miss that? You don't have that attitude. In the gleanings, like in the book of Ruth, when they would be going out and they'd be, somebody would come and they would, with a sieve, they would cut the grains, and the grains would be laying on the field, and others would come along behind them and gather it up and bundle it in twine and put it in a bag. And as they would march through the field, sometimes, you find, here one fell out of the bag. I lost a bundle, or there's some extra wheat there, or something that didn't get quite bundled up, or that's fine, leave it there. Not so that it would rot. It was a different society back then. It was so people who were hungry could come and eat it. So how could you apply that today? You might think, well, nobody walks through my fields today. Everything's fenced off, or I'm out in the middle of nowhere. Nobody's come out here. If I leave any gleanings in the field, then you know what's going to happen? It's going to rot. The bird's going to eat it, or something like that. Well, maybe the thing to do to apply, because the principle of the law isn't so much to tell you don't spend the extra energy to pick up the gleanings. It's the principle, the spirit of the law is to make sure that you are thinking about your neighbor. The principle is that you are being loving to your neighbor, that you're thinking about, the hungry. Let's leave some behind for those who are hungry. Now, how could you apply the spirit of that law today? You're out there in your field, you're a farmer, you're a rancher, whatever. How could you apply that? Well, maybe You leave the corner of your gleanings, you think, well, maybe you should, as you're harvesting, you could kind of think, well, let's see, if I went ahead and I ran my harvester all the way up, what's my extra yield going to be? Or if I get every last bale and I get every last, maybe I'll have an extra 3%, 4%, or 6%, whatever, I don't know. Estimate it. And then go ahead and harvest it all and take a percentage and give it to the poor. Just give it to them. Make it available for the homeless shelters in your area. Sell it, turn it into money, and donate it to a worthy charity. Love your neighbor. Take care of those who are in need. That is the principle. It was God's form of caring for those in need. They have, people talk about, it's a welfare state, and the state tries to make certain laws to care for people who are in need. They have unemployment, they have Social Security, and various welfare, there's food assistance, there's people, companies, or organizations, I should say, not companies, but organizations to help people with their power bill and with food and with various, there's even organizations that will help with housing, and that's a good thing. This was a biblical principle of how to do that. Certainly, the spirit of that applies today. I used to, I have an orchard. I worked with it like I did with the orchard I had at my last house. I had a nicer orchard at my last house, and, we would go through and pick our cherries and pick our peaches or various things. And I knew some people that were in need, and I'd always invite them up. Hey, the cherries are on. You want to come up and pick yourself a couple containers? You can have at it. That was my way of leaving the corners open. And then the 7th year, come pick it all. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. God's law is love. Torah is love. Sometimes we might think we love, but we don't know how to love. God's teaching us how to love. These are the laws on how to love. Verse 10, you shall not glean your vineyard, nor shall you gather every grape from your vineyard. In other words, don't glean, go back and pick your grapes and then go back a second time and pick again, trying to see if you left a few. Leave them for the poor who they can walk through. That's why the disciples were walking around with Messiah, and they were walking between the fields, and they were able to reach out and grab a little bit of grain and eat, because that was the custom, to leave a little grain so that people walking by could have something to eat. And that was the point. Leave a little something for somebody else. Think about others. It's kind of neat. Like sometimes we maybe go in a line to get a coffee at Starbucks or something, and all of a sudden, no, the person in front of you paid for it. That's kind of a neat thing. That's kind of like that same principle. Caring for somebody else, leaving something for somebody else. Love your neighbor. Verse 11, you shall not steal, nor shall you deal falsely, nor shall you lie to one another. All of these things have to do with honesty. It's just like, have you ever noticed a thief who was not also a liar? It's like, have you ever noticed have you ever seen an honest thief? The thief who always tells the truth is like, hello? Stealing is just lying with your hands instead of your mouth. It's still lying. It's still deceit. It's still they're cousins. They're related. And so God puts all these things. You shall not steal. That has to do with being dishonest. You shall not deal falsely. You shall not lie to one another. There are various ways that you can steal. One way is we think of most often, certainly, is just going out and taking something that doesn't belong to you. Tea is perfect. That obviously is stealing. I mean, if you go into some place of business and you lift something, and shoplifting, that's stealing, obviously. There are other ways of stealing. I know today I think to myself all the time about how many people are stealing from their employers by the amount of time they spend on Facebook at work. Now, here they are at Facebook. Oh, yeah, we had a great weekend, blah, 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 blah. Oh, yeah, well, this is my chicken cooking recipe and whatever. And they're at work. They're stealing from their boss. They're stealing from their employer. But that same person that would sit there and of course, you know what? Hey, look, 5 minutes a day, man. Come on, cut me some slack, Of course, if you actually put a timer on the computer, you'd find out it's closer to an hour. But no. It's just 5 minutes a day is all. Yeah, I know. Yeah, you're right. It's just 5 minutes a day. So is it okay to steal 5 minutes but not an hour's worth? At any rate, to me, that's stealing. Okay, when you are paid to do a job and you're spending it playing on the computer, that's stealing. If you write in your time as if you arrived at 7 and you got there at 7:15, isn't that stealing? If you stop working, go get a coffee and kind of hang around and this and that and then punch out, isn't that stealing? There are a lot of ways you can steal. If you get online and you think, well, I can go over here and I can buy this song, but if I get it over here, I can pirate it. I don't have to pay for that song. Isn't that stealing? Intellectual property, that's on the airwaves, man. That's free. That's not anything, a tangible thing. I invested well over closer to $120,000 designing a machine, and I got a patent for it. And that was back in the 80s. And I went pretty near broke investing into that machine, and I created something that was revolutionary. It was all a concept. It was all intellectual property is what they call it. And so I got a patent. As a matter of fact, I got quite a few different patents over my life. And that has been the primary source of income for me. And along the way, I had a very, very large company decide that they would like that idea. I ended up in a lawsuit. I understand what it feels like to have intellectual property taken. Other people who did not have to put the money out at risk want to take it and copy it and enjoy it. I hadn't had time to recoup my investments yet before now I've got somebody stealing my idea. And it really hurt. It hurt me deeply. And it destroyed my business. So when somebody wants a royalty for a song, or they've got this program or that program on the computer, and you try to get a pirated version, or somebody gives you something from a friend or this or that, don't kid yourself. You're a thief. Hey, sorry, I don't want to say anything that's unkind to anybody. It's okay. It's just intellectual property. You're a good person. You're still a good person. I know you got a lot of those stolen songs on there, but you're still a good person. Don't feel bad about yourself. Well, nobody should feel guilty, right? Thou shalt not steal, God says. There are a lot of ways that we can steal. I learned from a very dear friend of mine years and years ago about not stealing. I've had friends who, to me, were like some of the best friends you could ever hope to have. But they were some of the worst fathers I've ever seen. And one particular friend who was, from another Another state is a long, long way from, I don't want anybody to know who I'm talking about. But one particular friend, he taught me how not to steal from my family. Because all he ever did was work. He was a great friend. But all he ever did was work. Work, 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 work. And his family suffered. The time he owed his wife, he gave to his work. The time he owed his children, he gave to his work. I kind of thought after a while, then he began to get on me about, well, no, I can't do that because it's this or that family. And he wanted me to work at his level. I mean, I work hard. I am a hardworking man. And I overwork. I admit that I overwork most of the time. I overwork. But I have tried to be careful not to steal the time that belongs to my family. If I'm going to overwork, I take it out of my own hide and take it out of my own time. At least I try to. You owe your children a certain amount of time. You owe your wife a certain amount of time. Your husband a certain amount of time. I think we can steal time away. We can take things that rightfully belong to others and give it away in a variety of different ways. There are a lot of different ways that you can steal. The spirit of the law is that you don't take something that doesn't belong to you, and that you try to make sure that you're honest in your dealings, that you're not deceiving or dealing falsely. That's a beautiful statute. See, God's statutes are very broad. They have immense application. If you just narrow it down to just one or two little things, it's like you have missed it. They're not written that way. It's written to apply to a number of different things. They are statutes of life, God calls them. How to live. They teach us how to live. Verse 12, Leviticus 19:12. You shall not swear by my name falsely. You know, like we think of cursing, you know, using God's name in a curse, you know, they call that swearing. And that's true. That's a violation. But also it means, you know, how many times I've heard people say something and then they get really, really strong. And then I've heard, in Jesus' name I'm saying blah, blah, blah. And they try to invoke God's name as if Jesus came to him and said, this is what you shall say. And they invoke his name falsely. They swear by his name falsely, as if Jesus did say this. I mean, I've heard ministers do that so many times. It's just one of the ways that you can profane the name of God, to swear by his name, as if he told us to say this or as if he told us to say that. Verse 13, you shall not defraud your neighbor, nor rob him. The wages of him who is hired shall not remain with you all night until morning. You know, back then they had people would work. Oftentimes they would get paid at the end of the day for the day's work that they did. At the end of the day, they'd come get their pay. Most of the time today we have jobs, you know, we get paid either every week, every 2 weeks, sometimes bi-monthly, sometimes monthly, you know, different ways. However your company is set up or however your paying is, the principle is when the pay is due, that is when you pay it. I used to have jobs when I was working various different farms as a young guy getting started in life, and we'd actually get paid every day just like this. I mean, I remember working at the hop farms and tying hops and stuff like this in the summertime, and at the end of the day you'd go stand in line and they'd give you your check. You know, here's 8 hours, and it's like, good, I can eat now. I can have dinner. There's my dinner right there. And your hand to mouth, it matters. Don't withhold the wages of somebody that you owe. That is very, very important. They should not remain with you until the morning. Don't let even a day go by. I remember one time had a payroll and my company, and it was time for payroll, and I expected some money to come in, and it didn't come in, it didn't come in, it didn't come in, it didn't come in, and now all of a sudden, I did not have enough money to cover my payroll. Phoo-wee. I didn't have a really big payroll, but it was more than I had. It was more than I had. So I took my truck, opened up my safe, and got the title, and was heading down to the bank so I could use the title of my truck to get some money so I could make payroll. You shall not hold the wages of your employee. Now, on the way there, I happened to check the mail, and an unexpected check was there, and I was able to turn around and keep the title of my truck. But I was willing. Be willing. Don't hold the wages of somebody who works for you. Very important. You shall not curse the deaf, verse 14. Leviticus 19 and verse 14. You shall not curse the deaf, nor put a stumbling block before the blind, but you shall fear your God. I am the Eternal. Well, now that's a very big statute right there. That is a very broad statute right there. You shall not curse the deaf. There are a lot of ways that you can curse the deaf. It doesn't just mean don't go up to a deaf man who's sitting there and can't hear you and start cursing him, or get behind him so he can't read your lips. It doesn't just literally mean that you see a man walking down the street with a cane and you run over and get a stick or something and put it in front of him and see if you can trip him. Of course, it includes those things. But that is not the primary meaning, because that is not the way people usually do it. That statute is very broad. I think it's sufficiently broad that I'll save it for the next time we get back into Leviticus 19. Actually, we're just not getting into the good stuff, so we'll save that for the next time we get to go through Torah together. Leviticus 19:14.